Hello and welcome to another episode of EnVisioneering Exchange, the podcast where industry leaders discuss the most important topics in building and urban efficiency. I'm your host, John Sheff, Danfoss's Director of Public and Industry Affairs. You can subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever it is you get your podcasts. And today I am thrilled to be joined by Jackson Tiedmann, Danfoss's Regional Sales Manager for HVAC Drives. Jackson, thanks for joining us.
John, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and today we're going to discuss condition-based monitoring and what that means in the HVAC space. But before we go on, Jackson, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing at Danfoss?
Yeah, John, I'm a regional sales manager for Danfoss Drives, specifically on the HVAC side in the southern U.S. I was originally brought on to Danfoss as a sales engineer and took over this role in March of last year.
Great. So let's just jump in. Tell us, what is condition-based monitoring and how does it relate to your work at Danfoss Drives?
Yeah, so condition-based monitoring is not something new, but it is new to drives. Danfoss is the first manufacturer to incorporate it directly into our drives. Currently, condition-based monitoring, or we abbreviate it as CBM, can monitor 3 points. That's motor stator winding, that's vibration, and that's load envelope. Motor stator winding analyzes the current signature of the motor and can detect when there's a damage at an early stage. So motor winding failures usually don't occur suddenly. They'll start with a turn-to-turn short circuit, and then they'll develop over time. And what CBM does is it'll recognize that, and it'll provide the customer with a warning in advance of that critical fault occurring. And there's vibration monitoring, which can detect motor unbalance, looseness, misalignment, as well as mechanical resonance. This is not meant to be some complicated or expensive monitor, but the point is to tell the customer that something has changed, or to provide the monitoring that many don't currently use at all. The other major point is that it monitors at all speeds versus having a service technician go out and check at one speed or at one point in time. This will give you that full range. And then the last point is load envelope monitoring. This point will monitor both the torque and speed profile of the application. So this function uses both positive and negative thresholds. So a positive threshold could be something like friction in the system, while a negative threshold could be a broken impeller in a pump. And all three of these monitoring points are first initialized by running a baseline of normal operation when you first start up the drive in the field. And this baseline can be run for a couple minutes, or it could be ran up to 6 months. And after this run, the drive is constantly comparing the current operation back to that baseline. And it'll give you a heads up that something has changed. And we can do that with 2 warnings and an alarm. The first warning is, hey, something might not be right out there. You should have a service technician go out there and check it out. The second warning is a little bit farther away from that baseline, and it's telling the service technician, hey, you should go out and check it out immediately. And then finally an alarm, in which case the drive will trip and shut power off to the motor to avoid any additional damage to the equipment. And that's kind of the basics of what CBM does in Danfoss Drives.
Yeah, so it's really about predictive maintenance, about saving downtime, saving trips out to the equipment by the technicians, and if the technicians do have to come, giving them advance notice and information before they even get there of what to look for, right?
Correct. We're not trying to get rid of service technicians. We're trying to give them a heads up to be able to do their jobs more effectively.
Yeah, and I've worked a little bit with drives in the past, and there's just so much data that's coming out of these machines that goes unused. So I think it's pretty cool to be able to give this right to the technician at their fingertips and be able to use the smarts of the machine and incorporate the data into its everyday use.
Exactly.
Yeah. So does this all come with the drive, or do you need any external devices to be able to utilize it?
So there is one sensor that's needed, and that's for the vibration monitoring. That's a 4 to 20 milliamp velocity sensor that's wired to the analog input of the drive, and then you mount that directly on the motor base plate. But as far as the motor stator winding and the load envelope, that all uses the current capabilities of the drive.
Very cool. Let's talk about HVAC applications. How can this be used with our Danfoss HVAC drives and in different types of HVAC systems?
That's a great question. So it can be used in many ways. CBM can monitor if there's a clogged filter or if a fan is blocked or something like that. It can identify if there's leakages in the system or whether that's a ventilation system or a water system. It can tell if there's a broken impeller in a pump or whether there's fouling or sanding. So really all of these points can help you predict failures to keep your HVAC system running as smoothly as possible and with the least amount of downtime.
Yeah, so I think this is a key point, right? Because when you're describing the system earlier, it sounds like, okay, if there's a problem with the motor, we can kind of detect it. But really, I use this data to identify identify issues all over a HVAC system, whether it's on the air side or the water side. It's really useful information.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's really outstanding. Now, we know the drives and these systems can last, 15, 20, even 30 years in some cases. Can this be added to existing drives in the field, or is it only available on new installations?
It can. So CBM can be added to any FC102. FC102 is our standard HVAC drive. It can be added to any one of those as long as it has our latest generation of control card. And those control cards are in every drive that was produced after the year 2017.
Very cool. Yeah. So this can be added to even drives that have been out in the field for some time.
Exactly. And all you need, all you need is just a code from Danfoss to be able to input it into the drive, and then you'll have a CBM ready to go and programmed.
Yeah, I think this is another great example of how Danfoss Drives kind of stands behind the product. We're with you all the way through its life cycle and incorporating new technologies. Now, you've been at Danfoss for 3 years now, so you're a young guy. Where do you see this technology going in the future, 5, maybe 10 years down the line? Are we going to add more data points? Are we going to be able to use it in different ways than we're using it now?
Yeah, the plan is to continually add monitoring points to the drive so you can monitor anything basically in your system. Previously, it was done either through building automation systems or not done at all. So we want to start incorporating it and pushing it at the drives level so that the drive is more of a brains of the operation. Previously, you might have thought a motor just does its thing, turns on and off, but we want the drive to be consistently controlling and evaluating what's happening in that system.
Yeah, and I think this is, where the industry is headed, and this marriage of hardware and software, where the software is really taking control of the system, and we're utilizing all of the data that comes out. Because people don't believe me. There are literally hundreds, maybe thousands of data points that are coming out of a drive, depending on the application. Be able to utilize that, I think, is kind of the next step that we're getting to, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. And I think that's a great place to wrap up. Jackson, thanks so much for joining us. Any final thoughts before we leave?
No, just feel free to contact us at 888-DANFOSS if you have any questions, but thank you for your time, John.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was great to have you and a really interesting topic. And that's it for this episode of the EnVisioneering Exchange. Again, I'd like to thank my guest, Jackson Tiedmann, Regional HVAC Sales Manager for Danfoss Drives. And don't forget to subscribe to the EnVisioneering Exchange on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever it is you get your podcasts. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review, and share with your network. Again, my name is John Sheff, Danfoss's Director of Public and Industry Affairs. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next time.